It was a quiet Sunday in late winter, the kind of morning where the air feels half asleep, carrying both the promise of spring and the ache of something that hasn't thawed yet. The forest near Flagstaff stretched wide and pale beneath a thin frost, each pine branch glinting with cold light. I'd been running that trail for years, same time, same path, same silence. It had become a ritual more than an exercise. Some people pray. I ran. The ground was soft under my shoes, the kind of silence you can hear no cars, no voices, just the distant rush of wind through cedar. I wasn't thinking about much, which is exactly how I liked it, until I saw the shape under the trees. At first glance, I thought it was a fallen log tangled with old leaves. Then it moved, a faint twitch of an ear, a low shudder of breath, and the whole forest, it seemed, paused with me. I slowed down, heart-knocking against my ribs, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There, half buried in frost and needles, was a small bobcat. Her fur was matted with burrs and specks of blood. A piece of barbed wire bit deep into her hind leg. Someone's fence, probably, or a forgotten trap. She looked more shadow than animal. Every sign along this trail tells you the same thing. Do not approach wildlife, and for good reason. I'd spent most of my career as a park ranger preaching that exact rule. Keep your distance. Let nature handle itself. But standing there looking at her struggle to lift her head, I realized I wasn't looking at a wild creature. I was looking at pain who couldn't speak, and maybe that was what made it impossible to walk away. "Hey," I said softly. Not because I thought she'd understand, but because people talk to wild things when they don't know what else to do. "Hey, easy now." She blinked, slow, wary, tired. I could see her ribs move too fast, each breath a little battle. I remember thinking how unfair it looked, this proud animal built for strength and solitude, now caught in something man-made, something cruel and small. The irony wasn't lost on me. We build fences to protect what's ours, and too often they end up trapping what was never meant to be kept. I crouched down, careful, every motion deliberate. The forest smelled of sap and damp earth. I had an old flannel tied around my waist, a leftover habit from years of underestimating mountain weather. I wrapped it around my hand and reached toward the wire. She flinched, a warning in her eyes, but not a threat. More like a question, "Are you going to hurt me too?" "I've got you," I whispered, not sure who I was trying to convince her or myself. The metal was cold and sharp, biting into my glove as I worked the knot loose. My breath made small clouds in the air. She trembled once, then went still. The world narrowed to the sound of my heartbeat and the faint scrape of wire. When it finally gave way, I felt it in my chest like something unclenched. She didn't run. She didn't growl. She just lay there, blinking at me as if weighing the meaning of this strange mercy. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. Later, when I think back on that morning, it wasn't the rescue that stayed with me. It was the look in her eyes, this wild, cautious understanding. Like she recognized a kind of loneliness she'd seen before. Grief is a strange thing. It makes you invisible to yourself. After Grace died, I went silent inside. The house got smaller, the world thinner. I didn't stop living exactly, I just stopped being seen. Maybe that's what she was too. Something alive but unseen. A creature built to vanish into brush and shadow. Hiding hurt the way I hid mine. When I carried her in my arms to the truck, she didn't fight me. She just rested her head against my jacket, breathing shallow and steady, like she'd decided for this one small moment to trust. That drive back through the forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sacred. The road curved along the canyon pine needles, scattering across the windshield like soft rain. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need to. Her breathing filled the cab soft and rhythmic, a fragile metronome marking time between two hearts that had both forgotten what company felt like. There's a saying I once heard from an old tracker. Sometimes the forest gives you what you need, but never what you expect. I think that's what happened that morning. When I reached home, an old cabin tucked between Ponderosa and Sandstone, the sun had barely crested the ridge. I carried her inside, laid her on a wool blanket by the stove. She was light, two light bones sharp beneath fur. I ran the tap, filled a bowl, and placed it nearby. She didn't drink right away. She just watched me, head low, eyes glassy and gold. And for a long moment, neither of us moved. The world outside kept turning, wind shifting through the pines, a jay scolding somewhere above the eaves. But inside, everything held still. I felt the house breathe again, as though some old weight had lifted. It had been months since another living thing had shared this space. The stillness that once comforted me now felt less like peace and more like absence. But with her there, this small pulse of wildness, it softened. I sometimes wonder why we're drawn to help what's broken. Maybe it's because we recognize the same fractures in ourselves. Or maybe kindness is less about saving others and more about remembering we can still feel. That morning, I didn't save a bobcat. I simply said yes to something that asked nothing but presence. There was no grand music, no instant redemption, just a quiet exchange between two wounded creatures trying to trust the world again. People often think healing is loud, like laughter returning or light breaking through clouds. But it's not. Healing sounds like breath. It looks like a creature lifting her head after believing she couldn't. It feels like noticing the forest again, the smell of pine, the weight of air, the small proof that life continues. In a way, that morning was less about rescue and more about recognition. She and I were mirrors, each reflecting what the other needed to see that we weren't finished yet. I didn't know then what she would become or how she'd follow me from that day forward, her paw prints tracking every part of my life. I didn't know she'd remind me how to live in a house that had forgotten laughter. All I knew was that she had looked at me and stayed. That night, as she slept by the stove, I caught myself whispering her name, not one I planned, just one that arrived like a memory. "Willow," I said softly, "because you bend, but you don't break." She twitched her ear aside and kept sleeping. Outside, the forest hummed in the dark, the same song it must have sung for 1,000 years. I remember thinking maybe the house won't be so quiet tomorrow. If you've ever found yourself keeping company with something wild, or if you've ever felt rescued by what you tried to save, stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a bobcat. It's about what happens when life sends you a companion you never expected. And you decide to listen. The house had been quiet for 2 winters. That night, it breathed again. When I carried Willow through the front door, I realized how much silence can weigh. It's strange how a house can look perfectly lived in coffee mugs. Washed books stacked neatly. Everything in its place and still feel empty. I'd stopped noticing the quiet. It had become part of the walls, part of the air. The heater clicked on, filling the cabin with its low, familiar hum. I laid her down on an old wool blanket near the radiator. Her body was trembling not from fear, but exhaustion. I set a ceramic bowl under the faucet, filled it halfway, and slid it close. She sniffed at the water, then began to drink slow and deliberate. There was something reverent about that moment. Like the sound of her drinking tiny, rhythmic laps was the first real sound the house had heard in months. After Grace passed, I'd packed away her things, but I never moved the air she left behind. Her knitting basket still sat by the couch, a half-finished scarf resting like a question that would never be answered. There was a cup on the windowsill where she used to keep dried lavender. Even without her, the scent lingered faintly, like a memory too polite to leave. Every evening was the same. I'd come home, make coffee for one, and eat standing at the counter. Then I'd sit near the wood stove, listening to it crackle, pretending the sound was enough company. That kind of solitude doesn't hurt all at once. It erodes you little by little until you forget what warmth feels like. That night, though, everything shifted. There, in the quiet center of that small living room, lay a wild creature, breathing in sync with the rhythm of the house. The silence wasn't gone, it had changed shape. I remember lighting a small fire the way I used to when Grace was alive. She'd always say flames looked like they were listening to us, each flicker a reply to something unspoken. I sat on the floor a few feet from Willow, trying not to crowd her. She was still wary, eyes half closed, but never unaware. For a long while, we just stayed like that. Me sitting cross-legged on the rug, her curled tightly in a corner of shadow. I could hear the pop of resin in the wood, the distant moan of wind through pine. Now and then her ears would twitch like she was trying to decide if I was a friend or a threat. I'd never seen an animal hold itself with so much dignity, even in weakness. She didn't beg for comfort, she allowed it cautiously. And I respected that. I moved slowly, kept my voice low. "You're safe," I said, though I wasn't sure she believed me. When I left to make tea, I noticed my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from something else. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. It's a strange thing how life can start to return in the smallest ways. You think healing happens in loud moments, someone laughing again, or sunlight breaking through, but sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's the sound of claws shifting on wood, or the way a pair of golden eyes track your movements while you pour water into a bowl. That night I caught myself speaking out loud again. Nothing profound, just the kind of things you say when you've forgotten how to talk to another living being. "Still cold out there," I murmured. "You'll feel better soon." She didn't answer, of course, but her ear flicked, and that was enough. There's comfort in the presence of something that asks nothing from you. People mean well, but they rush you through your grief. Animals, they just stay. Later, as I watched Willow sleep by the radiator, I noticed the way her sides rose and fell calm and steady. And I thought about how different we are from the wild, yet how similar in the things we need. Both of us were creatures built to endure solitude, but not designed to live in it forever. The wild teaches resilience, but it doesn't teach you how to return from loss. That's what we were both learning in that moment, how to trust warmth again. And maybe that's why the sight of her resting there felt sacred. Here was this bobcat, an animal that belonged to open hills and starlit ridges, choosing even briefly to rest in the company of a human. Maybe not out of faith, but out of shared fatigue. That night I realized something simple: compassion doesn't erase pain, it changes the temperature of it. It turns it from cold to bearable. Over the years, I taught plenty of people about wildlife, how to read tracks, how to keep distance, how to respect boundaries between human and animal. But sitting there watching Willow breathe, I learned a lesson no manual ever taught. Every wild creature that crosses our path brings a mirror. Some show us courage, some show us fear, and some, like her, show us the quiet parts of ourselves we've forgotten to look at. Bobcats are solitary animals. They rarely form bonds beyond necessity. They live and hunt alone, and yet she had allowed me close enough to help her. It reminded me that survival isn't only about strength, it's also about trust. That idea stayed with me long after the fire died down. I fell asleep in the armchair blanket over my knees, the fire burning low. Sometime before dawn, I woke to find her standing near the window, her silhouette framed against the faint blue of morning. She was watching the snow drift outside, tail twitching slowly. The light caught in her fur, making her look almost translucent, half spirit, half creature of this world. Then she did something small but unforgettable. She turned her head, glanced back at me, and blinked. Slow, deliberate. It was the kind of gesture cats use when they trust you, an unspoken, "I see you. You're okay." And I felt that. I really did. For months after Grace died, I couldn't look at the empty chair by the window without feeling that sharp ache of absence. But that morning, when Willow sat there instead, it didn't hurt the same way. It didn't erase the loss, it gave it a place to rest. It's hard to explain how something so small, a glance, a shared silence, can start to knit together the torn fabric of a life. But it does. Love, even when it comes in unexpected forms, always carries the same instruction. Pay attention. Looking back, I think the universe has a quiet sense of timing. We expect healing to arrive in grand gestures, but sometimes it comes wearing fur, carrying silence, and asking nothing more than a warm floor and a little trust. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the heater, her breathing near the stove, was a kind of music I hadn't realized I'd missed. Maybe that's what the word home really means. Not walls or furniture, but the presence of something living that answers your quiet with its own. That morning, as I poured coffee, I caught her reflection in the window, still by the radiator, her tail curled around her paws. Outside, the forest glimmered in the thin light, and I could almost hear Grace's voice. "You're doing all right now." I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if she'd stay or if she'd vanish when her strength returned. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to find out. If you've ever shared your home with silence, you know how loud it can be. Stay with me, because what happened next wasn't about rescuing a wild creature anymore. It became a story about learning to trust the quiet, and letting it teach you how to live again. You can't rush trust, not with wild hearts and not with broken ones. Morning came quietly the way it often does in the mountains, light slipping between the blinds like a visitor who didn't want to wake anyone. Willow was still curled by the radiator, her breathing even. I watched her for a moment before making coffee, moving slowly, careful not to break the stillness that had settled over the room. There's something sacred about mornings after pain. They don't announce themselves. They just arrive as if to test whether you're ready to begin again. When I opened the door to let in some air, she stirred her ears, flicking toward the sound. For a second, I thought she might bolt, but she didn't. She just lifted her head, blinked once, and settled again, eyes following the steam rising from my cup. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something close, something like permission. Trust, I've learned, doesn't show up in grand gestures. It moves like the seasons, so gradual, you only notice the change when you look back. In those first weeks, Willow stayed near the radiator or the window seat, always where she could see the door. I didn't force her. I didn't try to touch her. Every day I talked to her softly while I went about my chores, letting her learn my voice, the way you'd learn a song, note by note, until it feels familiar. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me from the hallway, one paw half raised, like she couldn't decide whether to leave or stay. I'd pretend not to notice. I just kept moving through the day, washing dishes, fixing a loose floorboard, humming under my breath. I think she trusted the rhythm before she trusted me. It reminded me of the way Grace used to describe love. It's just time paying attention. One evening, I sat by the stove reading while the snow began to fall. The light dimmed early as it does in February. I reached to add a log to the fire, and when I turned back, she was closer than I realized. She'd crossed the room without a sound. Her paws barely made a mark on the old rug. She stopped halfway between the stove and my chair, body low, eyes alert, but not afraid. "Hey there," I said quietly. My voice surprised me. It had a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. She tilted her head, studying me. Then, as if making a decision, she stepped closer and brushed her whiskers against the side of my boot. Just once. Then she retreated to her blanket. It was such a small thing, a single touch, but it felt like a ceremony. A tiny acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I could be trusted. That night before bed, I tried something I hadn't done since she arrived. I knelt beside her and laid my hand gently on her chest. Her heartbeat was quick, fragile, steadying under my palm. For 3 heartbeats, she stayed still, then she leaned into the touch. That became our ritual, our quiet promise before sleep. I used to think that trust was something you earned with words, with assurances, with proof. But Willow taught me otherwise. She didn't need promises. She needed consistency. The same soft tone, the same gentle rhythm of my movements, the same space to choose closeness on her own time. It made me think about people, how we rush love, rush healing, rush forgiveness. We build walls, then expect others to scale them quickly. But the wild doesn't work that way. It reminds us that trust isn't a sprint. It's a series of still moments that slowly link together until safety feels natural again. Some nights when the fire burned low, I'd watch her sleeping. Her paws twitched as if she were running in dreams. I wondered if she dreamed of open ridges of cedar and moonlight of freedom waiting just beyond the tree line. And somehow, it didn't make me sad. It made me grateful that for now, she'd chosen to rest here with me. There's an honesty to wild animals that humbles you. They don't pretend to be healed when they're not. They don't disguise fear as pride or sadness as anger. They simply are. One morning, after her wound had started to close, she followed me out to the porch. The sun had just risen, staining the snow with gold. I could see her breath puffing little clouds in the cold air. She didn't step off the porch. She just sat beside me, watching the light crawl over the hills. And for a long time, neither of us moved. It struck me then that she wasn't tamed, she was trusting me by choice. That's the difference. You can't own love like that. You can only receive it quietly and hope you're worthy of it. People often ask how long it takes for a bobcat to recover from an injury like that. Physically, a few weeks. But the emotional recovery, the rebuilding of instinct and courage, that takes longer. In wildlife rehabilitation, they call it reacclimation. In life, I think we call it healing. Each day I noticed small signs of her strength returning. She started climbing the low shelves, then the couch. One afternoon I found her perched on the windowsill, eyes locked on a pair of jays fighting over seed. Her tail flicked in rhythm, her muscles alive again. It reminded me that healing doesn't erase scars, it teaches you how to live with them. And in a way, that's what she was teaching me too. The smell of pine kindling, the sound of her claws softly tapping on the wood floor, the warmth of her fur when she brushed past my leg, those became the background music of my days. Every morning she'd wait by the door when I laced my boots. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But one morning when I forgot my gloves, she meowed a small rough sound like a reminder. I laughed out loud. The sound startled both of us. I hadn't heard myself laugh in months. That's when I knew something had shifted for good. When you live alone long enough, you forget that companionship doesn't have to be complicated. It's not always about conversation or plans. Sometimes it's just the quiet reassurance of another living being nearby doing ordinary things at the same time as you. She'd nap near the stove while I worked at the table. I'd talk to her about nothing, the weather, the news, the book I was reading. She'd twitch an ear glance at me, then close her eyes again. And somehow, that felt like enough. Maybe that's the secret of love, being fully present without demanding anything in return. There's a phrase that came to me during those days. Love is not about taming. It's about learning the rhythm of someone else's heart and letting it change yours. Willow didn't belong to me, but she belonged with me at least for a while. And that distinction between owning and belonging might be the most important lesson she ever taught. Weeks passed. Her leg healed, her coat regained its sheen. One morning she followed me to the edge of the property, tail high, eyes bright with something that looked a lot like joy. She paused at the tree line, looking back once before disappearing into the brush. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hands, feeling a familiar ache return, the one I'd nearly forgotten. It would be days before I'd see her again, and when I did, the world would tilt once more, asking me to choose between law and love. If you've ever waited for trust to grow slowly, quietly, you know how fragile and beautiful it can be. Stay with me, because the next part of this story asks a harder question. When love crosses the boundaries of what's allowed, what do you hold on to? And what do you set free? Love doesn't always look legal. A few weeks after Willow's leg healed, life found its rhythm again. The kind that doesn't rush, just drifts like light moving across a wooden floor. Every morning, she followed me out to the porch, pacing just behind my boots, as if each step were a shared secret. She'd sit there, tail curled, watching the sun push through the trees. Sometimes I'd talk to her about nothing in particular, how the weather was holding, how the coffee tasted different that morning, how the chickadees had built a nest under the eaves. It all felt so natural, so harmless, that I forgot the world beyond my little stretch of forest might see it differently. Until one afternoon, a truck pulled up the gravel road, and I saw the green and gold seal of the ranger service stamped on the door. The ranger who stepped out was Caroline, a friend from my years on the job. She'd been a good officer, fair, sharp, steady. We hadn't spoken much since Grace died. Seeing her now standing there in uniform reminded me of a life I thought I'd retired from completely. She gave a quick wave and said, "Heard you've got a visitor." I hesitated. "Depends who told you." She smiled the way people do when they already know the answer. "The neighbors saw a bobcat on your porch. Thought maybe it was hurt." Willow was lying in the patch of sunlight near the door, grooming her paw, unbothered. Caroline looked at her, then back at me. "You know the law, Ethan," she said softly. "You can't keep her here." There it was, the rule I'd spent years enforcing myself. Wild animals belong in the wild. You can help them heal, but you can't make them stay. Still hearing it from someone else felt different. "She's not a pet," I said. "She came on her own." "I believe you," Caroline replied. "But if she's getting used to human care food shelter, it could hurt her when she goes back out there. You know how it works." Her words weren't harsh, they were honest. I glanced at Willow, who was now watching us both with quiet alertness, as if she somehow understood what was being discussed. The idea of her being taken away, handled, tagged, released in some distant stretch of forest felt unbearable. "Let me keep an eye on her a little longer," I said. "Just until I'm sure she's ready." Caroline studied me for a moment. "You were always good with animals," she said finally. "Just remember, you can't save everything that wanders into your life." When her truck disappeared down the road, I stood there for a long time, the sound of her words echoing in the trees. I knew she was right. I'd taught the same lesson to others, but what the law never accounted for was love the kind that doesn't fit neatly into rules. The wild is built on boundaries, territories, instincts, invisible lines of survival. Humans build boundaries too. Laws, definitions, rules meant to keep balance. But sometimes love asks you to stand in the gray space between them. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridges, Willow came to sit beside me on the porch. She pressed her shoulder against my knee, her fur warm from the light. I ran a hand through her coat, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. I whispered, "I'm not trying to keep you. I just don't know how to let you go." Maybe every person who's loved something wild understands that tension, the pull between wanting to protect and needing to release. It's a fragile, human contradiction. Grace used to say, "You can't own love. You can only practice it." I never understood what she meant until now. Because what Willow and I had wasn't ownership, it was an understanding. She didn't belong to me, but somehow she belonged with me. For a time at least. That night, I sat up late, reading through old ranger manuals, the ones still stacked in the study. Every page echoed Caroline's warning, "Do not domesticate wildlife. Do not interfere with natural behavior." I closed the book and thought, but what if the wild found you first? I know the law exists for a reason. Wild animals need their instincts intact. When humans blur that line, we endanger the balance that nature spent centuries perfecting. Bobcats are born solitary. They survive through silence, stealth, and distance. Dependency can mean death. I'd taught others that very lesson, showing slides of captured rescues that didn't make it once they were released. And yet, standing in that small cabin, watching Willow sleep peacefully by the stove, I wondered, how do you measure dependency? She still hunted. Still flinched at thunder, still stared into the woods as though she heard an entire language I'd never learn. Maybe she wasn't losing her wildness at all. Maybe she was teaching me to find mine again, the part that listens instead of conquers, that feels instead of explains. Later that night, I went outside. The air was sharp with the scent of rain. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called long echoing notes, rolling down the valley. Willow appeared behind me, silent as shadow. She didn't make a sound, just sat beside my boots, looking toward the sound. Her fur brushed my leg. The stars were coming out slow and clear the way they do in Arizona after a storm. I felt the night pulse around us, the heartbeat of something ancient, something wild, something that doesn't belong to anyone. And in that moment, I understood maybe the wild doesn't just exist out there. Maybe it's something inside us too, the untamed part that refuses to stop caring even when it hurts. The next morning, I found Willow waiting by the door as usual, tail flicking. I poured her a bit of water, set out a small piece of venison. She looked up at me, then back toward the trees. That's when I realized she wasn't staying because she needed to. She was staying because she chose to. Choice is the purest kind of freedom. And that's what makes love, whether human or animal, so fragile, so beautiful. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. The air smelled of pine and dew. For a moment she hesitated, ears turning toward the forest. Then she stayed. Maybe tomorrow she wouldn't, but that morning she did. We talk about laws as if they're only written on paper. But nature has its own laws, older, quieter, impossible to legislate. One of them is simple: what you nurture will either leave you or change you. Sometimes both. The law of the wild isn't just about animals. It's about us. Our ability to hold love without possessing it, to release without resentment, to care without control. And maybe that's the hardest kind of freedom to learn. A few days later, I woke to find the cabin unusually still. The blanket near the stove was empty, the back door slightly ajar. Outside, the snow carried a trail of faint paw prints leading toward the ridge. I knew before following them what I'd find. If you've ever loved something enough to let it go, you already know the quiet ache that follows. Stay with me because the next part of this story isn't about loss. It's about what happens when the wild tests love, and love learns to listen. Some goodbyes don't sound like words. They sound like silence where breathing used to be. The morning Willow vanished was ordinary in every visible way. The coffee brewed slow. The wind rattled the porch rail, and the light stretched across the kitchen floor in pale gold stripes. I remember thinking how calm everything felt, that quiet kind of peace that comes before you realize something's missing. Her blanket by the stove was empty. The back door was open just enough for a breeze to move through, lifting the corner of an old newspaper on the counter. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. The tracks started at the porch, small, distinct ovals pressed into a thin layer of snow. They led toward the tree line, then disappeared where the sunlight hit the frost. At first, I told myself she'd be back by noon. She'd done short wanderings before, half an hour, maybe less, testing her strength, listening to the call of the wild that never really left her. But noon came and the yard stayed still. The air carried a kind of emptiness I hadn't felt since Grace died. Bobcats don't belong to anyone. Even when they linger near human places, they never stop being creatures of distance and instinct. I knew that. I'd known it from the start. She'd always been half wild, half trusting a visitor, not a possession. Still, when something you love disappears, logic has no weight. The mind says this is natural. The heart says, find her. So I grabbed my coat flashlight and thermos and started walking. The forest was quiet, except for the crunch of snow beneath my boots. The tracks zigzagged through the brush, fading and reappearing like fragments of thought. I followed them down the slope toward the creek. That's where I found it, a rusted trap, half buried near the roots of a cedar. Its jaws were open, sharp, cruel, waiting. A snare of wire lay tangled beside it, the same kind that had nearly ended her once before. I crouched beside the trap, anger rising like heat through the cold. I'd spent decades teaching others to protect this land, and yet here it was again, a piece of metal greed, cutting through something sacred. I didn't find her there, but the sight of that trap told me enough. She'd gone farther than usual, maybe chasing scent or memory, and stumbled into the old cruelties humans leave behind. I scoured the ridge until dusk, calling her name softly, not wanting to startle anything that might be listening. The sound echoed back, empty. The forest, once my sanctuary, suddenly felt endless. As the light faded, I stood by the creek listening to water running under ice. My reflection looked older in that dim blue. I realized I wasn't just searching for her. I was searching for proof that kindness still mattered in a world that forgets so easily. It's strange how quickly the world can return to silence. One day you're sharing space with another heartbeat, another rhythm. The next, you're back to the sound of your own footsteps, your own breathing. Loss doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it just folds itself into the corners of your life, subtle as shadow, until everything you touch feels hollow. That night I sat by the window staring into the dark where the forest began. Every creak of the house sounded like hope trying to get back in. I told myself she was fine, that the wild had called her home, that she was running under moonlight where she belonged. But even that thought carried a dull ache. Because I'd learned something about love, it doesn't vanish cleanly. It lingers in the air, in the space beside you, in the habits you forget to break. In the days that followed, I noticed things I hadn't before. The rhythm of the forest had changed. Jays called earlier. The wind moved differently through the cedars. Or maybe it was just me tuning in closer, listening the way Willow always did with her whole body. It made me think about what wildness really means. People often imagine it as chaos or danger, but I think it's something quieter. Wildness is the part of life that refuses to be owned. It's the truth beneath the fences we build. Maybe Willow hadn't left me behind. Maybe she was simply reminding me of where we both came from. A few days later, I returned to that same creek with gloves and wire cutters. I spent hours removing every trap I could find. Some were decades old, iron-rusted hinges frozen, but they still waited. That's the cruelty of neglect. Even when people forget, the harm remains. As I worked, I thought about the fragile line between human care and human damage. The forest doesn't need us to manage it, it needs us to respect it. I carried the broken traps home in a burlap sack, laid them on the porch as a kind of memorial. They gleamed dull red in the late light, like old wounds finally exposed. That evening, snow began to fall again. The flakes landed on the traps, melting and refreezing tiny crystals forming in the grooves of metal. I sat by the window watching until the porch lights blurred in the flurry. Inside, the house felt emptier than before. Her bowls still sat near the stove. Her paw prints still faintly marked the wooden floor. I couldn't bring myself to wipe them away. The fire cracked, throwing soft orange light across the walls. The same light she used to chase with her eyes, curious and calm. I thought about that, the way she'd sit so still, watching the flames dance as if memorizing them. Now it was just me and the fire, and the memory of her heartbeat beneath my hand. I think that's what loss truly is, not the absence of something, but the weight of memory that refuses to leave. Every kindness we give creates a shape inside us. And when it's gone, we don't go back to who we were. We just learn to carry the outline. The world had given her back her freedom. It had given me back my solitude. But neither felt like victory. They felt like lessons, gentle, necessary, and hard. I used to think love's purpose was to keep something close. But now I understand it differently. Maybe the point of love, of kindness, of connection is to prepare us for letting go. To make the world a little softer when it inevitably breaks. Willow was teaching me that even in her absence. The wild doesn't promise permanence. It offers presence. And sometimes that's enough. A week passed before anything changed. The snow began to melt, turning the air thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. I was outside stacking wood when I heard it, a low, familiar cry somewhere near the ridge. At first, I thought I had imagined it. But then it came again clearer this time. And I knew. If you've ever waited for something you love to return, you know the silence that lives inside that hope. Stay with me, because the next part of this story isn't about loss anymore. It's about what returns when love learns to trust the wild again. Sometimes what leaves us doesn't disappear. It circles home. The call came at dusk, low and uneven, carried through the pines like a voice made of wind. I was stacking wood by the porch, half lost in thought when I heard it again, that unmistakable cry, wild and soft at once. I froze. The sound came from beyond the ridge, near the same creek where the traps had been. For a moment, the world around me seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the quiet, came the faint crunch of something moving through snow. And there she was. Willow emerged from the trees like a shadow, remembering its shape. Her coat was thinner, her gait uneven, but her eyes, those gold-shot eyes, were steady and sure. She paused at the edge of the clearing, watching me with a kind of wary calm, the same look she'd given me the first day we met. I didn't move, didn't call her name. I just waited. After a long moment, she took a step forward, then another. And then she came home. I don't know what drew her back. Maybe instinct, maybe memory. Maybe something in between, that invisible thread that sometimes holds two lives together, long after logic says it shouldn't. She limped slightly as she crossed the yard, leaving a trail of uneven prints in the snow. When she reached the porch, she hesitated, glancing toward the open door as if asking permission. I stepped aside the way you do when someone important needs to enter first. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of pine smoke and coffee. She moved slowly, sniffing the corners, the same path she used to take radiator first, then window seat, then the spot by the stove. Finally, she lay down on the blanket exactly where she used to sleep and exhaled. That sound, that quiet, trembling exhale, was the most human thing I'd ever heard. I knelt beside her and saw a small wound along her hind leg, raw but clean. Not from the old wire, this one was fresh, maybe a scrape from running or a narrow escape. She'd survived something again, that much was clear. I cleaned the cut, gently boiling water and cooling it before dabbing the edge with a soft cloth. She winced, but didn't pull away. When I finished, she pressed her chin against my wrist for the briefest moment, the same gesture she'd given me months ago, when everything between us was new and fragile. Outside, the wind shifted. A coyote called far off and Willow's ears twitched toward the sound. But she didn't move. That night, she slept beside my bed close enough that I could hear her breathing. Somewhere around midnight, I woke, coughing from the cold air, and before I could sit up, I felt the weight of her head rest against my arm. A soft sound, almost like concern, rose from her throat. And I realized it wasn't just her who had returned. Something in me had too. When loss carves a space inside you, you start to think it will stay hollow forever. But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes what you thought was gone finds its way back, changed, scarred, but alive. As I watched her sleep, I understood something I hadn't before. Love doesn't promise permanence. It promises presence to show up again even when the world says you shouldn't. In her return, there was no drama, no music, no tears, just quiet grace. And in that quiet, I found peace. The next morning, I made coffee while she sat by the window watching the forest the way she always did, alert, curious, unafraid. The light caught her fur, revealing every silver streak, every healed line. I thought about how people talk about resilience like it's a loud thing, like it roars or fights. But real resilience, the kind nature teaches, is quiet. It's the choice to keep breathing after the world forgets to notice. Willow wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a miracle. She was something better, proof that healing can find its own way home. People say animals don't understand us, but I'm not sure that's true. They read us differently in gestures or rhythm. When I fell ill that winter, I lay up with fever for a few days, and she never left the room. She'd sit at the foot of the bed, eyes half closed, tail wrapped around her paws. Sometimes she'd climb onto the blanket, lie across my legs, and stay there for hours, her steady warmth easing the ache in my bones. It wasn't affection as people know it, it was something deeper. Mutual recognition. The wild is taking care of the wounded in return. And maybe that's the truest kind of loyalty. There is not born of need, but of understanding. The days after her return blurred into a kind of slow-motion peace. Snow melt dripped from the roof. The forest floor began to breathe again, releasing the scent of damp soil and pine sap. When I opened the windows, the breeze carried in the sound of chickadees and thawing creeks. Willow followed me from room to room, always near, never demanding. She'd curl beside the stove when I read, pad behind me when I fetched firewood, and wait by the door each time I stepped outside. Her gaze fixed on the line where the woods began. Every movement of hers felt deliberate, graceful. Every breath she took seemed to echo something ancient, the rhythm of survival, of trust rebuilt. Sometimes I'd reach down and touch her back lightly as I passed, and every time she'd lean into it just enough to say, "I'm here." I realized then that love, at its best, is a kind of rhythm, two lives breathing in sync, even when they don't speak the same language. She had found her way back, not because she was lost, but because she chose to return. And that choice meant everything. Some nights, when the wind grew sharp and the moon painted silver lines across the floor, she'd climb onto the chair by my bed, watching me fall asleep. Her eyes half closed, her body perfectly still. I'd whisper, "Good night, Willow." And in that quiet space between words, I'd hear the low, steady hum of her purr, a sound that felt like forgiveness. They say we save animals when we rescue them, but I don't think that's quite true. What really happens is something closer to balance. You give care, they give trust. You offer warmth, they teach presence. Willow's return wasn't the ending of her story. It was the continuation of mine. Because she came back, I began to go outside again. I started to listen again to the creek, to the birds, to the silence that no longer felt empty. She brought me back to life by simply living hers. Spring crept in quietly. The snow retreated to the shadows and the forest grew restless with new life. I began keeping notes again about her habits, her routines, the way she'd tilt her head at the sound of a hawk's call or trace the flight of a moth across the window. What started as journaling turned into reflection lessons she didn't mean to teach, but somehow did. If you've ever had something dear return to you, even once, you know how that changes the way you see everything after. Stay with me, because the next part of this story isn't about rescue anymore. It's about what the wild taught me once I started to listen. She never spoke, but she taught me everything I forgot to remember. The snow had gone by. April replaced by the soft hum of spring. The creek ran louder now, swollen with meltwater, and the woods around the cabin seemed to breathe again. Every morning, light filtered through the windows in long golden lines, catching the dust motes in slow dance. That's when Willow began spending more time outside. She'd sit at the edge of the porch, head tilted, watching the forest wake up the quiver of leaves, the scurry of chipmunks, the distant echo of a woodpecker tapping somewhere unseen. I used to sit a few feet behind her with my coffee, and neither of us said anything. It became our routine. Two quiet observers watching the same world from different hearts. In those still mornings, I began to understand how much the quiet ones, the animals, the trees, the wind, have been trying to tell us all along. They don't speak in language, but in rhythm, in patience, in the simple consistency of showing up. I started to keep a small journal again. At first, it was just habit-old ranger instincts, but soon it became more than notes. Each page turned into a collection of small teachings lessons I didn't know I needed until she showed me. Things like trust doesn't rush, kindness doesn't need to be seen to exist, silence isn't empty, it's full of listening. And then one morning I wrote something that startled me. Love isn't about taming, it's about staying long enough for fear to forget your name. There was one afternoon that stayed with me. I was mending the garden fence winter storms had left it crooked and weak. The soil smelled alive again, damp and rich. Willow watched from her usual spot by the tree line, tail flicking lazily in the sunlight. When I finished, I looked up to find her gone. I called softly, scanning the brush. Then I saw movement near the slope she'd climbed halfway up and was crouched low, staring at something I couldn't see. I approached slowly, quietly as I could. There, in a patch of light, stood a young rabbit, not a foot from her. The world seemed to hold its breath. Willow didn't pounce. She didn't even move. She just watched, still alert, curious. After a few moments, the rabbit hopped away and Willow turned her head toward me. Our eyes met, and I swear I saw something like understanding there. It struck me, restraint can be its own kind of strength. That was her lesson that day, power without harm. Presence without demand. I thought about how different that lesson was from the one the world often teaches. We mistake noise for significance, speed for success. But Willow, she lived by an older truth. She reminded me that wisdom doesn't shout, it waits. Watching her, I began to remember what peace feels like when you stop trying to earn it. Grace used to say I filled silences too quickly, that I was afraid of stillness. Maybe she was right. It took a wild creature's company to remind me that silence is not absence. It's connection in its purest form. Some mornings, when she sat by the window, sunlight turning her fur into gold, I'd catch myself wondering how many things in life we overlook, simply because we're moving too fast to see them. The forest never rushes. The stream doesn't worry about where it's going. Even loss, when it comes, takes its time. And maybe that's the point. Maybe life is less about fixing and more about witnessing. I began to see the world through her rhythm. The slow blink, the patient breath, the quiet waiting. It changed how I moved, how I spoke, even how I prayed. Instead of asking why me, I began to whisper, "Thank you for letting me see this." In my ranger years, I used to lecture about ecosystems, about how every predator, every prey, every tree plays a role in balance. But Willow taught me what that balance feels like. Bobcats help keep the forest healthy by maintaining order, not through aggression, but through necessity. They take only what they need. They don't hoard, don't destroy for sport, don't confuse abundance with worth. And that made me think maybe the forest is wiser than we are. It wastes nothing, forgives everything, and still keeps growing toward the light. She reminded me that balance isn't just ecological, it's emotional. It's knowing when to hold on and when to let go. By late May, the evenings grew longer. Fireflies blinked like stars caught between trees. I'd sit on the porch journal on my knee while Willow dozed beside the steps. The smell of pine sap and rain drifted through the air. Sometimes, when the night deepened, she'd lift her head and listen to something I couldn't hear, an owl far off or the low rustle of wind in the grass. She'd tilt her head as if acknowledging the voice of the earth itself. In those moments, she looked timeless, a bridge between what's wild and what's human. And I'd think, how many years did I spend walking these woods without ever truly listening? One evening I found myself whispering, "You've changed me, haven't you?" Willow didn't move, She didn't need to. The truth was already there, written in the stillness between us. It wasn't just her I'd been learning from, it was everything she'd reawakened in me. The patience to mend what's broken without rushing. The grace to accept love without holding it too tightly. The humility to see that I was never the teacher, I was the student. I used to think growing older meant fading out of the world, but she showed me it's the opposite. Growing older means tuning in closer to the smallest sounds, the faintest light, the quiet presence of things that stay when everything else moves on. Sometimes I wonder if every living thing carries a story meant to heal something in another. Willow's story healed me, but maybe mine in some quiet way was healing her too. Maybe that's how the universe keeps balance, through the exchange of quiet mercies between souls that find each other when they need to. She was wildness made gentle, and I was solitude learning how to listen. Summer arrived slowly and surely. Willow spent more time near the woods again, but she always came back by nightfall, padding across the porch as if to check that I was still there. I started recording our days, not for science this time, but for memory. Little notes, sketches, and thoughts. I didn't realize it yet, but those pages were becoming something larger, a record not just of a friendship, but of grace rediscovered. If you've ever learned something from silence from an animal, a place, or a moment that simply asked you to listen, then you already understand this part of the story. Stay with me, because in the final chapter, I'll tell you what happens when you decide to share that story, not to keep it, but to pass it on. When she follows me now, it's not out of need, it's because we both chose to stay. Summer came with the gentleness of an old friend. The forest softened in color, the morning smelled of rain and cedar, and life returned to its familiar rhythm, steady, unhurried, whole. Willow no longer limped when she walked. She moved with quiet confidence, the grace of something that had found its way back to itself. And in her rhythm I found mine. Every day she'd follow me out to the yard as I went about the simple rituals of living, splitting wood, checking the garden, mending the gate. When I stopped, she stopped. When I moved, she moved. We didn't speak, but we didn't have to. Some bonds, the truest ones, don't depend on sound. They breathe through presence alone. I began writing again that summer, not for research or reports, but for remembrance. The pages filled with small observations, the way her fur glowed gold in morning light, the way she blinked slowly before sleep, the way she'd press her forehead against my knee in moments that felt like prayer. Those pages became more than notes. They became a testament to trust, to patience, to the quiet transformation that happens when two living beings learn to coexist without demand. It felt right to share what I'd learned, so I started sending short pieces to a local nature center. Small reflections about wildlife compassion and the invisible bridges between humans and the natural world. A few months later, one of those pieces was printed in their newsletter. The title was simple, "The Bobcat Who Stayed." The response surprised me. Letters began to arrive from people I'd never met. Widows, veterans, teachers, people living alone in small towns across the country. They wrote about their pets, their gardens, the silence in their homes, the things they'd lost, and the things that had found them again. Each letter carried the same quiet gratitude. Thank you for reminding me that love still exists in small, wild ways. That's when I understood that Willow's story wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed proof that kindness still mattered. One afternoon, I recorded a short video of her sitting by the creek, her reflection rippling with the water. She turned toward me, blinking once in that slow, deliberate way she always did. I posted the clip online with a few words. She came back when she was ready. So did I. It reached more people than I ever imagined. Comments poured in from across the world, from city apartments, nursing homes, remote farms. People saying the same thing: I needed this today. And I realized something important. You don't need to save the world to make it better. Sometimes it's enough to tell the truth about one small act of love, to let it ripple outward, quiet but unstoppable like that creek under the pines. I often think about how easily I could have missed that moment in the woods all those months ago. One different step, one distracted thought, and she might have remained just another shadow among the cedars. But that's how grace works. It doesn't shout for your attention. It waits. It meets you in ordinary places, a trail, a kitchen, a quiet home that hasn't heard laughter in a while. Willow didn't just heal in my care. She gave me back something I hadn't realized. I'd lost the belief that love can still find you even when you've stopped looking. She taught me that kindness doesn't ask who deserves it. It simply shows up again and again until the world feels a little less cold. Sometimes people ask if she still lives with me. The truth is, she lives near me now. She spends her days in the woods, returning whenever she wishes at dusk, at dawn, or on nights when the moonlight spills silver across the porch. I'll hear her before I see her, the soft crunch of paws on pine needles, the quiet hum in her chest that sounds like memory. She always stops by the same spot just outside the door and waits until I sit beside her. We stay there together, looking out at the forest. No words, no need. Just two creatures who once saved each other, still keeping company. That's the legacy of love, not ownership, not permanence, but presence. The courage to care without controlling, to stay gentle, even when the world grows rough around the edges. Every act of compassion, no matter how small, creates a trail for someone else to follow. I didn't rescue a bobcat that day. I became part of something bigger, a story of healing that keeps unfolding, carried forward by everyone who chooses kindness over fear. The last page of my journal is dated late summer. It reads, "Tonight she came again, sat on the porch as the wind moved through the pines. I placed my hand over her heart, the way I always do. Felt it beat against my palm, steady, wild, alive. For a moment we breathed together. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't feel loss this time. I felt gratitude. When I close that notebook now, I think of all the people who've written to say that her story made them remember something, a cat they loved, a parent they miss, a time when the world felt simple and kind. Maybe that's all any of us really need, to be reminded that love leaves a trail, and if we're quiet enough, we can find our way back to it. I used to think life was about big moments, decisions, accomplishments, the kind of milestones people write down. But the truth is, the things that stay with us are smaller. A shared glance, a heartbeat under your hand, the courage to open a door and let something wild walk in. That's what Willow gave me, a gentler way to be alive. A reason to keep believing that there's still kindness in the world waiting just beyond the trees. We live in a time that moves too fast, where attention is short and empathy feels scarce. But stories like this, quiet, slow, honest, remind us what really matters. That healing doesn't always come from medicine or time. Sometimes it comes from connection, from choosing love when indifference would be easier, from seeing something broken and deciding not to walk away. If there's one lesson I carry from this journey, it's this: the heart doesn't stay empty when it gives. It fills in the giving. If you're watching this right now, maybe you've lost something too. Maybe someone you loved, or a part of yourself you thought was gone for good. I hope Willow's story reminds you it's never too late to care, to listen, to begin again. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it, not just online, but in how you move through the world. Be the reason someone or something feels safe enough to return. And if you'd like to walk this path with us, to hear more stories like this one, stories of kindness, healing, and the quiet bond between humans and the wild, please subscribe, and stay connected. Your presence here helps these stories find the people who need them most. Finally, if your heart feels called to help to support the rescue and healing of wild animals like Willow, you can leave a super thanks or small donation below. Every act of generosity helps another creature find its way home. Because love doesn't end with one story. It keeps going from forest to heart, from heart to heart, as long as we keep choosing it.